In this video, I'm going to show you how almost every Billboard chart song is broken, what happens if you master your song extremely loud, at what loudness level your own music should be mastered, that nobody cares about Spotify mastering tips, and that you should not master your music at -14 LUFS on purpose, how a grand piano can sound beautiful without any equalization or compression, how I use high-resolution graphics and cannot pronounce the words digital domain, digital domain, how loud Grammy winners master their music, and that you not need to be afraid of loudness penalty, and a lot more. Hello, I'm Emu, I'm a producer, mixing and mastering engineer, and today's video is going to be about how loud you should master your music for Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and so on, because I noticed that many of my customers don't really know what this is about, and to show you in a nutshell what the whole video is going to be about, let me show you this. At the end of every mastering session, the mastering engineer and the customer have to decide how loud they want to master the songs, and you can master them pretty loud or pretty quiet. So the problem is that our brain is not very intelligent and always thinks that the loud mastered version of a song sounds better than the quieter one. So if your song is in a random playlist and there is a loud song before your song, and after that there's your song which is quiet, your song will always sound not as good as the song which was before. And that's the reason why the pop industry tries to push the music very, very loud since the last 30 years. And this is not an easy thing to do, because you cannot only pull up the master fader, because in the digital world you cannot exceed 0 dB. So if you try to exceed 0 dB, it starts sounding like that. Nobody wants to hear that, so the only option is to put more gain into the master limiter, which is basically just a very, very hard compressor, and then it sounds like that. So there's also the other problem. You cannot exceed the master limiter by a certain point, because then it also starts to distort. So this is one of the main things I have to do as a mastering engineer. I have to decide how loud can I push this music until it starts sounding not as good anymore, but it's still competitive to other music on the radio or on Spotify. So the second problem is that Spotify and iTunes sometimes turn your music down if it exceeds a certain level of loudness. What does this mean? Your music is going to be measured in loudness in LUFS, and if we measure our song here, I just push the play button, then we can see it has a loudness of -7 LUFS. If you raise the gain, the number gets higher. If you put it down, the number goes down as well. So in our case, our music has a loudness of -7 LUFS. It is sometimes going to be turned down by -7 decibel, which is, compared to the original, half as loud as the original master. So it's like this compared to this. And a main part of this video is to show you that this is actually not a problem, because sometimes I have customers who take my masters on the internet on some platforms and measure them there, and then the platforms tell them, yeah, your masters are too loud, they're getting turned down by Spotify and iTunes by -7 dB. And then my customers think, yeah, this might be a very bad thing, but most part of this video is about that this is actually not a bad thing and quite a good thing. I know this is a lot of information to process from this video, and to give you guys the chance to check everything out by yourself at home, I composed and produced 4 different songs in 4 different styles. We have a rock song, We have an EDM song. We have a grand piano song. And we have a recorder song with orchestra. And I took all of these songs and made different masters out of them and put them on Spotify. So you can check everything out, how different masters sound on Spotify, which are a little bit louder, which are a little bit quieter. And I will also provide you with the original masters. So there you can get the original wave masters. You can download them for free from my homepage. I put the link down there in the description. And then you can take the original master file, compare it, how does it sound on Spotify or on YouTube when they make MP3s out of it. And you can also go to Spotify and maybe pick a Harry Styles song, play it, and play one of my songs after it, and listen if the volume differs or something like that, and discover by yourself how music maybe changes or doesn't change in different ways on the internet. One thing we've learned so far is that our brain thinks that quiet music doesn't sound as good as loud music. So the music industry and also the commercial industry noticed this pretty early, I guess in the 90s. And you might notice this from watching TV like a couple of years ago. The commercials were much louder than the actual TV program. Basically, you got shocked when the commercials started. And basically, when Spotify came up, also YouTube, they had the same problem that there were different masters out there. For example, you had a nice jazz song, which was pretty dynamic but quiet in a random playlist. And after that, you had a Metallica song and you got totally shocked and blown out of your chair because it was suddenly so loud. So to counteract this problem, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, and almost everybody else decided to turn down the volume of music which exceeds minus 14 LUFS. So if your song is mastered at minus 6 LUFS, it is going to get turned down by minus 8 decibel, which is more than half of the volume it was mastered in. So now you might go like, oh my God, my music will be so quiet on Spotify and everywhere else, and what can I do? But you might have guessed it, it's not the case. And to show you that, we have to take a look into the Spotify specifications. It's October 2022, so Spotify might change this in the future. And also I have to say that what I am telling you only matches for Spotify, iTunes, etc. But of course not for audio mastering for cinema, TV or Apple digital masters. But we're in October 2022 and it says here, we adjust tracks to minus 14 LUFS. This is what I already told you. According to the ITU 1770, this is where you can read how this all is measured. And note, this is very important. This is the most important thing. Note the web player and third-party devices, for example, speakers and TVs, don't use loudness normalization. So what does this mean? It simply means that if you're using like an Amazon Fire TV stick or a Google Chrome stick or third-party loudspeakers, something like the Sonos loudspeakers or smart TV, Spotify will not turn down your masters. They just leave them as they are. Or as they write it here, they only turn down the music on either your laptop, if you're using the app there, or on your mobile phone. So everywhere else, your masters just stay where they are. And this is the first reason why you should not master your music at minus 14 LUFS, although Spotify tells you to do so in their FAQ. Let's have a look in there again. Here you see the mastering tips and they say, target the loudness level of your master at minus 14 dB integrated LUFS and keep it below minus 1 dB true peak. We'll have a look in the true peak in a moment, but here it says minus 14 dB integrated LUFS, and down here they say if your master is louder than minus 14 dB integrated LUFS, make sure it stays below minus 2 dB true peak. This is also very interesting. We get to this in a moment. So this is the point where I tell my customers, there you can see it's not a bad thing to stay at the volume level of the masters, the loudness level that I gave you, because on every third-party device, your music will sound equally loud as other pop music, and this is what you want to achieve. You don't want to be quieter than everybody else, because then, as we learned, you probably sound not so good as the other ones do. And that's actually a thing which is pretty easy to prove, because that's a good thing about mastering. Every time you have a question or you're not sure about something, you actually can measure it. And to measure how a third-party device reacts to Spotify, we actually just need an Amazon stick. So to measure what comes out of the Amazon stick, I take the stick, put it right into this little box, which splits the audio signal into a digital laser signal. You see, there it is like blinking red. There comes the laser out, and the other part of the cable I put into my measuring device right here. Let's have a look on it. Here you can see the measuring device, and in the background you can see Spotify, which is played by the Amazon stick. And as I told you before, I put all the masters on Spotify and everywhere else so we can play them and we can measure them. The album is called LUFS Test and it's from the emu.eu. And the first thing you might notice in the app on the Fire Stick is that you cannot adjust audio normalization. So on your mobile phone and also on your laptop, there is an option audio normalization to activate them or to deactivate it. And this, this is basically the knob which turns down the music. If you activate it, your music gets turned down to the level of minus 14 LUFS. And if you deactivate it, it's not, but it's only available in the app on your mobile phone and on your laptop, but not on the Fire Stick. So let's measure the first song on the Amazon stick. Let's reset this here for a second. And we already can see that the maximum true peak there is at minus 9.1 dB true peak. And now one could say, yeah, it seems like the music is getting turned down on the stick because it should hit almost 0 dB and it's 9 dB quieter. But to double check it, I have a version here which is at minus 14 LUFS and minus 1 dBFS. So if this is true, if the first version would have been turned down, the second version now of minus 14 LUFS should not be turned down and actually hit minus 1 dB or 0 dB or something like that. Let's see. And there it is. It's minus 9.8 dB true peak, which means that the music is not getting turned down by the Spotify app on the Amazon stick. So the Amazon stick basically gives a digital output of approximately minus 9 dB, but it doesn't turn down music which is mastered pretty loud. This obviously raises the question, how do Grammy winners master? And it's actually, you might have guessed it, pretty easy to measure. For that, you only go to your Spotify app on your PC or Mac, and you go into the settings and deselect auto adjustment of loudness. So our music is not getting turned down to minus 14 LUFS. Then you need, of course, a Billboard Charts list, like from September. And I will also put the link of this list down into the description of this video. Then you go to your settings and you have to install a driver, which in my case is the Black Hole 2 channels. It's like you can throw any system sound in there and it is going to be routed to your DAW. So you have to put all the system volume up here and also in Spotify. Then you hit the play button, you go to your DAW, and if you hit the record button there, you can record what Spotify is sending out. Isn't this amazing? So let's have a look at the Billboard Charts 2020 September. And here they are, the Billboard Charts of the US in September 2022. And wow, look at that. These are big sausages. Let's get a closer look here. So this is the first song, which is Harry Styles' As It Was. And let's measure it. And here it says a true peak level of plus 0.37 dB, which is a lot. And the loudness is at minus 5.8 LUFS. And as you might remember, we just looked into the FAQ of Spotify and it says here, if your master is louder than minus 14 dBFS, yes, it is by 8 dB, then you should make sure that it stays below a true peak of minus 2 dB, which is here, yes, plus 0.37 dB. So Harry Styles doesn't obey the law of Spotify, but also doesn't, which is here, number 2, Steve Lacy and Lizzo. And this is interesting because we have a remastered song from 2018, but the original is pretty old. It's like Kate Bush running up that hill, which is in the charts right now again, and we can see it here as the 4th song, and it's pretty quiet. Yeah, you guys can guess why it is so quiet. It's probably because the mastering engineer who remastered it thought it would be cool if it stays almost like it was in the 80s. And here we can see this is, yeah, in a true peak only by plus 0.02, but the integrated loudness is at minus 13.8 LUFS, which is, yeah, almost as Spotify suggests it. So we can clearly see here that music from the 80s was definitely mastered very, very much different and quieter than it is mastered today. And to dive a little bit deeper into this topic, I made a table for you with the Billboard charts from 2021, the top 10, and the Billboard charts September 2022. And I measured all the songs for you and wrote it down. So let's have a short look at this table, which you can, by the way, of course, download somewhere down there in this description. So here we have the Spotify versions of the songs. Here we have the high-res versions of the songs, which I bought on Cubos. So these are all high-resolution WAV files, probably the original masters. And here we have the songs from YouTube. So here you can see in yellow, these are the LUFS of the songs. So for example, The Weekend Blinding Lights has minus 8.4 LUFS and is getting reduced by 5.6 decibel on Spotify. Or Post Malone has minus 5.5 LUFS and gets reduced by 8.5 decibel on Spotify and iTunes. So you can see the mastering engineers obviously don't care that their music is getting reduced on any platform. This is very important to notice. So here you can also see that almost every song is clipping in the true peaks. No song is clipping in the sample peaks, but in the true peaks, which results in a lot of clipped samples. Like here you have actually a true peak of plus 2 decibels. And if you ask a mastering engineer, he will probably tell you that this music is broken. Almost all the songs are technically broken, but also almost nobody cares. I will get to this a little bit later in this video, how this works. But what is also interesting is that there are two songs which are actually almost in the specifications of Spotify, which is Dua Lipa and Da Baby. And take a look at that. Dua Lipa only has a sample peak of minus 1.3 decibels and a true peak of minus 1 decibel, which is almost the Spotify specification. So this also shows us it can work to be almost in the specifications, but as you can see, almost nobody cares about specifications of Spotify. So this brings us to the question, how loud do you guys out there should master your music, or should your music be mastered by somebody else? And to give you an appropriate answer to that, I produced 4 different songs in 4 different styles, so there's something for everybody. And with the help of those songs, I might give you a pretty good answer, because what we've learned so far is that at first you cannot trust any Spotify FAQ, because obviously nobody cares about it. And secondly, you can also not go somewhere on the internet and put the masters there and be told that you get a penalty and your music is getting turned down. I think those people are just trying to make money with your fear of having a bad master. So let's have a look at the first song I produced for you, which is the rock song you heard before. So this is mastered at, I think, minus 7.9 LUFS. And you might ask yourself, yeah, why minus 7.9 LUFS? My answer just is because it sounds good. Have a listen to it at minus 14 LUFS, which is somewhere around here, and listen closely to the snare drum. Let's get back to minus 7. Minus 14. So the snare drum really comes out of the mix because it's mixed like that. And the mastering limiter, which is usually the last plugin in a mastering chain, really pushes the snare drum into the mix and glues everything together. So you really should notice that this last plugin totally shapes the sound of your music. Not only the loudness, also a lot the sound. And I've seen tutorials on the internet where people go like, yeah, you know, for Spotify, I do it at minus 9, and for the club, I just go down to minus 14 because it gets more punchy. It might get more punchy, but you could also pretty easy destroy the whole sound you mastered before, and you should be totally aware of that. But you should also be aware of that you cannot push this thing to all its limits. Listen to what happens if we push it like hell. So there is a certain point where the music just is getting distorted because we are raising up the gain here and pushing it to the limits of 0 decibel, and it's just getting like smashed at some point. And this is usually also the art of a mastering engineer, to get the most out of every song without actually destroying it. And we know many songs from history that were destroyed basically in the 90s and the early 2000s. So totally be aware of that as well. So let's have a listen to a pop EDM song and how it reacts to a lot of compression and limiting. And this one is mastered at minus 7.5 LUFS. And have a listen to it again, mastered at minus 14 LUFS, and listen closely to the snaps. again, the master limiter is pushing the percussion and snaps really into the mix and glues everything together. Listen to it again on -7.5. And this is what you have to keep in mind. Again, the mastering limiter really shapes the sound of the song by gluing everything together. And if you want to achieve a certain sound with your music, like David Guetta EDM sound or ZZ Top rock sound like we heard before, you really have to push your master limiter to the limits. That's my opinion. I don't think that there's any other way to get this tight glued sound. And the total opposite of what we just heard is something which comes now. Here we have actually the same song as the EDM song played by a piano. Doesn't this sound beautiful? And what I want to show you here is that, actually the recording is quite high-end. It's a big Bösendorfer grand piano with 14 high-end microphones from Neumann and Schöps. But on every track there's actually no EQing and no compression. Only, let's have a look here, there is a little bell. And here we just have a low cut, and there is the master limiter, which, by the way, only cuts the very loud peaks. Let's listen to it again. And again, there's the question, how many LUFS? Let's have a look. It's -14.3, so pretty quiet. Why so quiet? You might have guessed it, because I like it. And I also tried out different settings in the mastering limiter, like pushing it a little bit more, like this. And it's just a thing. To me, even if I push it 1 dB more, it starts sounding bad. And I don't want this beautiful piece of music sound bad. So I need this huge dynamic range to represent all the nice sounds of this instrument. And in the end, somebody might say, yeah, but you cannot listen to it on a mobile phone if it is so quiet. Well, yeah, that's true, but this beautiful music is not intended to be listened to it on a mobile phone. You should go somewhere where it is quiet, where you have a nice place, some nice headphones or nice stereo, and enjoy the music there. This is definitely not David Guetta. Yeah, and basically, if you have a good instrument and some good microphones and you put them on the right place, you can achieve a lot without almost doing nothing. And this master, it's also made in 96 kilohertz, just for later use for myself. But let's have a look. All those masters I showed you yet, you still can download somewhere there, and they're totally for free. So you get all my mastering versions of the pop song, of the rock song, of the piano in 96 kilohertz, also in 44.1. And you also get the last tune for today, which is the recorder song. Let's have a listen to that. So again, you might have noticed it. It's the same song as we heard in the EDM version and the piano version. And the reason why I actually wanted to make a recorder version is that I sometimes tell my customers that I can master a recorder louder than a rock band. And so I tried it out by pushing it very hard, something like that. Or even that. And I have to say, it turned out I could manage to make it louder than the rock song, but it didn't sound pretty good. And I would have to like turn many, many knobs and use a lot of plugins just to make it happen, and even to let it sound good and loud. And I decided actually to leave it again at, you might have guessed it, minus 14 LUFS, as far as I can remember, recorder, minus 14.3. And again, this is just a number where to me the song sounds best. And of course, there are many possibilities to push it even harder. Actually, right now you should listen to Pirates of the Caribbean somewhere on YouTube, just to compare how really hard pushed Pirates of the Caribbean is, and actually doesn't sound like an orchestra anymore, compared to my version now, which is pretty soft and has a lot of air and sounds pretty beautiful to me. Although I really have to admit that this is definitely like a plastic orchestra out of the Contact library, and I also didn't arrange it very well. So this is more like a keyboard arrangement where a keyboarder just sit down and put some keys into the computer. A real orchestra arranger would have done it very much more beautiful. But just to show you this, how it sounds, how it works, this is totally enough. And I hope that you can enjoy the whole orchestra song as well as all the other songs. And let me come to a little conclusion here. So the video doesn't end here, but I think this is a good time to make a little conclusion here from what we've, or you guys, hopefully have learned today. So, of course, there's no right or wrong in how loud you should master your music. There are songs which need a lot of compression, especially when you have competitors somewhere flying around on Spotify, and when you really have to be as loud as somebody else on the internet, you have to push it there very much. But also, if you have like very beautiful music which needs a lot of air and a lot of room, don't be shy, don't be afraid, just to give it the right amount that the music needs, because usually the first thing which is there should be beautiful music. So the other big question which is still open is, why do so many mastering engineers, maybe even Grammy-winning mastering engineers, master their music so loud and even accept clipping in the true peaks to their music? And I think the answer to that is that it worked for over 30 years. So long time ago, when the CD started in the 80s and in the 90s, where they start to really push the limits of the digital domain of the CD, it worked mastering like that. And then there was iTunes, and it even worked to put the loud masters on iTunes like 20 years ago, even though there was already this clipping, but back then you couldn't measure it actually. And 10 years later, there was Spotify coming up, and yeah, there were already like millions and maybe trillions of masters around, where the music companies weren't like, okay, let's remaster 5 million songs of 10,000 different artists because now we have Spotify, and they say we have to make it quieter. So also in the future, it can be possible that Spotify won't be there anymore in 5 years, and that maybe TikTok starts a new music platform which gets very famous. Everybody puts his music there, and then maybe they decide not to level the music like they do it today. So the way music is mastered for the last 30 years, it's pretty safe to say that it also will work for the next 30 years, no matter what Spotify says or iTunes says or anybody else says. It just worked, and it probably will work. And we have seen on the table that it obviously works. So thank you for watching until here. If you want to support me, you can hit all the subscribe buttons and bells and what everybody else says at the end of the video. If you also want to support me, you can hire me as a mixing mastering engineer or producer or composer, because that's what I do for a living. If you want to support me more, you can buy the original 24-bit versions on my homepage down below there, and also on Qbus, because what I did is, in the first place, I made some 24-bit versions, and from that I made 16-bit versions, which you also can download from my homepage totally for free. Take them, play with them around, do whatever you like to. And thanks again for watching. Now there comes a little appendix where I want to talk a little bit more about some specific details about what I talked before. For example, also why there are like so many different versions of those songs, so many different mastering versions. And if you want to know more about that, just stay tuned. It starts right now. Through my whole video, I talk a lot about true peaks and sample peaks. And I wanted to show you what this actually means and why this can be a problem. So I made this very high resolution image on the back of lead sheet, obviously. And let's have a look what is painted on there. So here you have 0 dBFS. It never gets louder than 0 dBFS in the digital domain. So if you have like a wave coming up here and hitting the 0 dBFS, it's totally fine. There is no distortion. This is what basically the sample peak level shows us here. There is no distortion. But there is the possibility that a wave hits over the 0 dB and gets down again. But the sample points are only measured at this 0 dB line, which means if it is translated into the digital domain, the sample points are exactly at 0 dBFS. So if you measure it this way, the sample peaks are totally fine. There, it is said there is no clipping. But if you, and that's the point, if you reconstruct the wave later in your mobile phone from digital back to analog, your amplifier is reconstructing a wave which looks like this. So basically it's stored totally without sample clipping, but your amplifier is adding clipping and distortion at this point in the conversion of digital to analog. So this wasn't easy to measure in the past, but yeah, I think since last 10 years it was possible to measure, and since then we measure a true peak level to make sure that there is no distortion added by the converting of the digital signal back to the analog world. But if we also look at the table from before, we can see that the true peak levels are hitting the ceiling. Even in the original masters, the true peak levels are way beyond 0 dBFS, and the mastering engineers don't really care about it because it worked for the last 30 years. And I guess they do this because you can get a higher loudness and volume level of your music without adding any limiting. So for example, if we take Dua Lipa here, she could easily raise her song by 1.3 decibel until hitting the 0 decibel sample peak level. This would also mean that she would raise her loudness level about 1.3 decibels without adding any limiting or compression, simply by raising up the volume. But this would be at the cost of getting true peak clipping and possible clipped samples like the other songs have here. And that is the reason why I made many masters of the same songs. Let's have a look at them. For example, the pop version exists at minus 0.4 dBFS, which is my preferred conservative sample peak level because there are less true peaks, and also at minus 0 dBFS, which basically means it's the same master, just 0.4 dB louder. And the conclusion of that is that also the loudness of the masters raise up about 0.4 dBFS or LUFS. So this is actually why I have these masters in here. So you can go to Spotify or somewhere and try to listen if maybe my masters distort a little bit at the loud passages when you listen to the 0 dBFS versions. And I even went one step further. I turned off true peak limiting in these versions, here in the pop version and also in the rock version. And this means in the mastering limiter, there is the possibility to cut off the true peaks as good as possible. And some people do this and some people don't. And people say that it might give you a little bit of extra punch. And again, you can check this out for yourself at home. If it gives a little bit more punch, the different versions between 0 dBFS and 0 dBFS, no true peak limiting, or maybe if it adds distortion, I don't know. And another thing is, I made this very special just for you because I know that there are some guys out there who really want to know it. I made a version of the pop song at minus 5.1 LUFS and I called it Nuke because it's just like pushed to all, for me, possible limits at a point where it might still sound good. And it is even louder than Post Malone with minus 5.5 LUFS, or louder than Harry Styles. So just check it out, download the original master and compare it to the Spotify version, and yeah, decide for yourself if you like it by yourself. And yeah, in the end, I also want to tell you, I put 24-bit versions on Spotify and 16-bit versions. And the 24 bits was really strange. I had a German distributor for like the 16-bit versions, but he only took 16-bit versions, so I couldn't put the 24 bits on his platform. And it was really no problem. It was uploaded like in a few seconds and online after 2 days or something. And I had to pick an American distributor for the 20-bit versions because not everybody uploads 24-bit versions of WAV files. There are only a few out there. And they totally canceled my upload for the first time because they said I cannot name my songs like that. And then I tried it again, I paid again, and in the second time they said again I have to change all the names of my files because there are some shops out there, maybe not iTunes, somebody else, who just accept a certain format of names. So I actually had to redo the whole album name, which is called now LUFS Test 24-bit. So originally it was like a 24 as a number, and also all the other numbers I have over here, which looks so beautiful, I had to change in the 24-bit versions for Spotify. So the list is exactly the same, but the names are a little bit strange. So excuse me for that, but there was no other way to do this. So I think that's enough for today. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this long video, and thanks for watching all the way through. And yeah, whatever you think, write it down into the comments. Maybe I'm going to make some more videos in the future about certain mastering topics. Thanks guys, have a good one. Thanks for watching and hope to see you maybe again somewhere. Bye bye.